Hello friends! Today we wrap up our series of the study of the life of Joseph from the book of Genesis. I hope over the last 4 weeks and including today that you've been able to connect with Joseph and to see how his life can impact your life and the decisions that he made could impact your decisions in the future. Remembering from Genesis 39:2 that the Lord was with Joseph, just like the Lord can be with us. Today's lesson can be boiled down into one thought. When you don't know what to do, pursue peace instead of payback. Now, I think there's 2 aspects of payback. There's the positive side and the negative side. The positive side of payback, for example, would be if you're in the grocery store and you're paying for your groceries, but you don't have enough money to cover it. But the person behind you is like, hey, you know what? Let me cover whatever the difference is. I'll pay for that. And that person doesn't want to be paid back. They don't want any back. They don't want any money back. They don't want you to do anything for them. It's just a nice gesture from them that they want to cover the difference in your grocery bill. I see that as the positive side of payback. But then there's the negative side of payback, and that's kind of what we'll focus in on today. And that's when we've been hurt and we want to hurt someone else. We want to pay back the hurt that we've received and give it to somebody else. For example, when someone talks behind your back, you may want some payback. Or when somebody flirts with your boyfriend or girlfriend, you may want some payback. Or when someone fails to text you, or they don't invite you to that gathering, you may want some payback. It's in those moments that we feel pain. We want someone else to feel pain just like we felt. The people we are closest to are usually the ones in our crosshairs. They're usually the ones that are on our list of those that we want to pay back. They're the ones that have probably hurt us the most because we're closest to them, so they're the ones that we want to give the payback to. We can see payback manifest itself really in 4 different ways. The first one is a public payback, where maybe somebody made fun of you in a group of people. Well, you obviously want to do that to them. You want to take wherever you are, whatever public setting you're in, and you want to make fun of them. You want to roast them. You want them to be hurt in front of everybody just like you were. Or there's the passive payback. And we may see this sometimes on social media where we'll post something that could be construed as a slam against somebody, but maybe not. Only those involved in the situation would know. And so we kind of take this passive approach. The third way is the imaginary payback, where we don't actually have a conversation with this person, but we have this imaginary conversation in our mind. And we may have this conversation 20 or 30 times where we have that zinger of a comeback when they're making fun of us, but we don't ever really do anything about it. And I think the fourth way, and I believe this is really more detrimental than the other 3, is that we find enjoyment when someone fails. If someone has hurt us and we see them fail, or we see them being hurt by somebody else and not us, that we can find enjoyment with that. That they're hurt just like we were, but we didn't have anything to do with it. And so sometimes we can find enjoyment with that because we can see, hey, they got what was coming to them, but I didn't have to do it. I think all 3 of those, or all 4 of those, are things that we need to work on and things we don't need to do. That we don't need to pursue payback. That we need to be pursuing peace. And that's where we find Joseph in his story as we wrap it up today. If you remember Joseph's story, he went from favored son to slave to prisoner, and now he's been put in second in command in all of Egypt. If you'll remember, Pharaoh had a couple of dreams. He dreamed that there would be 7 years of prosper, 7 years of abundance, but then there would be 7 years of famine. And so in the midst of Joseph being able to accurately interpret those dreams, he was put in charge so that he could raise up the storehouses so that when the 7 years of famine came, that Egypt would have enough food. And so the famine wasn't just localized to Egypt. It was in all the surrounding areas, even up to the area where Joseph's family still lived. And so they were running out of food and they were starving. And so Jacob decided to send Joseph's brothers back to Egypt, or down to Egypt, to be able to get them some food because they were running out. And so Joseph's family thought he was dead. Like years before, they thought he was dead, or he was gone, he was sold into slavery, who knows where he could be. So in their minds, there was no way, no idea that they would ever run into him again, especially in Egypt. But as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he knew exactly who they were. Maybe Joseph's physical appearance had changed somewhat. He was probably looked different wearing the garb of the second in command in Egypt. And so they were unable to recognize him. but he sure recognized them. And so if you read in chapters 42 through 50, you see this unfolding of this interaction between Joseph and his brothers. And we're just going to briefly look at a little bit of their interaction. But I encourage you to go back and read chapters 42 through 50 that really highlight what was going on during this time. But we're going to read in Genesis chapter 45, starting in verse 1. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Imagine the tension, the emotion that was filling that moment. Joseph was here face to face with his brothers, the ones who had wanted him dead, those that eventually sold him into slavery. This was a moment that was gift-wrapped for Joseph to give payback to his brothers. At any point, he could have tossed them in jail. He could have sent them away without food. He could have even killed them. He's second in command in Egypt. He could have done anything he wanted to. What would you have done in Joseph's situation? You come face to face with the person that has harmed you. What would you do? Well, what did Joseph do? We see here in these first 3 verses of chapter 45 that he reveals himself to them. And he asks them, "Is my father still alive?" He still cared for his father, and he still missed his father. Chapter 45, going down from verse 4 to verse 7. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors." Joseph wanted reconciliation from his brothers. He was revealing himself to his brothers so that he could maintain or create anew his relationship with his brothers. He wanted to move past the past and move forward into the future, having a great relationship with his brothers. Joseph, at some point, he went through the hard task of forgiving his brothers. Now, maybe it was when he was in prison, when he was really at rock bottom. He had a lot of time to think, and he forgave his brothers for what they had done to him. But at some point, leading up to where we are now in chapter 45, Joseph had forgiven his brothers for all the things that they had done to him, for all the past, all that it led to. He had forgiven his brothers. He was able to acknowledge their wrong in his hurt without causing more hurt. Only a person who's sought forgiveness or sought to forgive others is able to do that. Only someone who is healed internally is able to do that. And so Joseph chose forgiveness for his brothers instead of payback. And he went on to tell his brothers, "Hey, go get my father and bring him back. This famine is severe. It's only been 2 years. There's 5 years left. Go get them. Go get our family and bring them all back so that we can all live here in Egypt." And so when we don't know what to do in situations where someone has hurt us, we need to try to pursue peace instead of payback. Now, pursuing peace means that we are fighting for the relationship. Joseph was more concerned about a relationship with his brothers than he was about getting payback from them. He wanted that relationship, and he wanted to know how his father was doing. And so he was pursuing that relationship instead of payback. And he was only able to do any of this because of the work of the Holy Spirit in his life, because of the work of what God was doing. Genesis 39:2, the Lord was with Joseph. Even as he was figuring out how to forgive his brothers, the Lord was with Joseph. When we pursue peace, that means that we lay down our right for payback, that we let go of revenge, and we say goodbye to the desire to get even, and we pursue the path of forgiveness. Now, our situation is not going to be the same as Joseph's. We're not going to be where he was or experiencing the same things that he was. And even our own situations are unique to each other. There are different things that have harmed us or hurt us. And it is a unique situation for us to figure out what it looks like to seek peace and to seek forgiveness. And so we have to come to the Lord and ask Him to help us with that. So who in your life do you need to seek reconciliation with? Who have you wished in your own mind would fail because of something they've done to you? Our job is to seek the Lord, for the Lord to change us. We will never be able to change that other person. But in pursuing the Lord, He will change us, just as He did with Joseph. Joseph, if anybody could have wanted payback or could have done payback to somebody who hurt him, it was Joseph. But he chose the path of forgiveness. He chose to seek peace instead of payback. And that's an example for all of us to follow. Seek the Lord so that we can pursue the path of forgiveness. Seek the Lord so that we can pursue peace and not payback. And that's my encouragement for us today.